Chapter 1: The Weight of a Locket. The rain didn't just fall, it wept. Cold, greasy tears that slid down Jane's neck and plastered her thin black dress to her skin. Mud, thick and greedy, tried to suck the worn boots from her feet with every shift of her weight. She stood apart from the others, a lone, forgotten island in a sea of huddled black coats and shared grief. Her father, Alpha Marcus, stood at the head of the grave, his voice a low rumble of practiced sorrow that held no real warmth. He spoke of loyalty, of a life given to the pack. Jane's stomach twisted because she knew the truth was far sharper, far uglier than his pretty words. Her mother hadn't just died. She'd withered, like a flower cut from its stem. Because of the hollow ache in her chest, Jane clutched the small silver locket in her palm. The metal was smooth, warmed by her skin, its familiar weight a tiny anchor in the storm of her loss. It was the last thing her mother had given her, a whispered promise pressed into her hand. Never forget where you come from, little wolf. The strength isn't in the howl, it's in the roots. What did that even mean? How could roots help when the entire world had been washed away? Following the Alpha's final empty platitudes, the mourners began to disperse, their quiet murmurs swallowed by the wind. Her father didn't look at her. He never did. But her cousin, Ilara, did. She moved with the predatory grace of a wolf who knew she was at the top of the food chain, her perfect blonde hair untouched by the miserable weather. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a familiar, chilling condescension. Still clutching that old thing? Ilara's voice was like honey laced with poison. Honestly, Jane, it's time to let go. Before Jane could react, Ilara's fingers, cold and quick, snatched the locket from her hand. The chain snapped. For a second, the small silver heart seemed to hang in the air, a tiny, captured moon against the gray sky. Jane's breath hitched. Ilara, don't. A cruel smile played on her cousin's lips. She's gone. This is just a piece of metal. It's as worthless as the rogue's child who holds it. And then she opened her hand. The locket fell. It didn't make a sound as it landed on the dark wood of the casket, a final, silver tear. The gravediggers, taking Ilara's gesture as a signal, began to shovel. The first clump of wet earth struck the coffin with a dull, final thud that echoed deep in Jane's bones. They buried it. They were burying the last piece of her mother she had left. They buried her hope. They buried her love. They buried her past. The word echoed in her mind, a venomous whisper that wrapped around her heart. Worthless. Her family turned their backs, a united front of indifference, and walked away. They left her there, shivering in the rain, with nothing but the mud and the ghosts and that one single word. As she stood frozen, a strange sensation prickled at her fingertips. It wasn't the cold. It was something else. A faint, rhythmic pulse coming from the very ground beneath her feet. A deep, ancient energy that seemed to answer the frantic, broken beating of her own heart. Chapter 2: A Bloom in Winter. In the aftermath of the funeral, the pack hall felt suffocating, its air thick with false sympathy and the scent of damp wool. Jane couldn't breathe. She needed the forest, the one place her mother had shown her where the world made sense. She slipped out a side door, a ghost leaving her own wake, and ran. She ran until the sounds of the pack faded, replaced by the whisper of pine needles and the steady drip of water from ancient branches. The woods didn't judge, they simply were. They were old, they were deep, and they were honest, which was more than she could say for anyone she knew. This quiet place was her only sanctuary, because it was the only thing her mother had truly left her. Finding their hidden spot, a small moss-covered clearing sheltered by ancient oaks, Jane finally allowed herself to crumble. She sank to her knees on the damp earth, pulling her mother's journal from the hidden pocket of her dress. The leather was worn, the pages filled with her mother's elegant script. Most of it was lore, recipes for herbal remedies, stories of the first wolves. But hidden between the lines, in a code they had created together, was something else, a different kind of teaching, of forbidden magic. The earth breathes, Jane. Can you feel it? It has a pulse. Listen with more than your ears. Her mother's voice was a memory, soft and urgent. Closing her eyes, Jane focused, pushing past the grief. She pressed her palms flat against the cold ground, feeling the damp chill seep into her skin. She reached for that thrum she'd felt at the grave, that deep, silent hum. It was there. Faint but steady. A primal rhythm. A power that sang in a language older than wolves, older than words. She remembered the stories her mother told, tales of a time when their people didn't just command the pack, but the forest itself. A skill lost, or perhaps suppressed. Jane focused on a single dormant moon petal bush nearby, its branches bare and skeletal against the gloom. It shouldn't bloom for months. But she remembered her mother's hands, how they could coax life from the most stubborn soil. Jane poured all her sorrow, all her love, all her desperate longing into the earth beneath her. She didn't command it. She asked. She pleaded, and the earth answered. A single bud, tight and pale, swelled at the tip of a branch. Slowly, unfurling like a sigh, it opened. One perfect, pearlescent white flower, its edges tipped with silver, glowing with a soft internal light in the dim clearing. A bloom in winter, a miracle, a secret. A twig snapped behind her. Jane's head shot up, her heart slamming against her ribs. Adrenaline erased the quiet magic in an instant. It was Torvin, her father's beta, his face a mask of grim duty. He didn't seem to notice the impossible flower. His eyes were fixed on her. The alpha requires your presence, he grunted, his tone leaving no room for argument. There is a gathering tonight, with the Silver Moon Pack. You are to make yourself presentable. A formal gathering? An invitation for her? It made no sense. They never included her in anything important. A cold knot of suspicion tightened in her gut, heavy and certain. They didn't want her there. They wanted something from her. Chapter 3. Shadows and Scents. The great hall buzzed with a tension that had nothing to do with celebration. It was the sharp, metallic hum of politics, of predators circling each other under the guise of diplomacy. Jane kept to the deepest shadows along the far wall, a ghost in a borrowed dress, making herself as small as possible. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, yet no one truly saw her. To them, she was just a stain on the Alpha's legacy, a whisper of a scandal best ignored. She was fine with that. Being ignored meant being safe. It was the only armor she had ever known because it was the only one she was ever given. From her vantage point, she watched her father and Alara speaking with the Silver Moon Alpha's beta. They were all smiles and confident postures, a perfect picture of pack unity. A lie. It was always a lie. Then she overheard it. A fragment of conversation carried on the air. A fine tribute, Marcus, the Silver Moon Beta was saying. A union with your family will solidify our borders for a generation. Alara laughed, a sound like chimes of ice. Oh, she's not for a union. She's just a gesture. A worthless thing to smooth things over. Our Alpha Kalen is very particular. A worthless thing. A tribute. Jane's blood ran cold. The forced invitation, the dress, the sudden interest in her existence, it all clicked into place. They were giving her away. Not as a bride, but as a token, an object to be discarded to gain favor with a neighboring Alpha she'd never even met. Who was this Alpha Kalen? Why would he ever agree to such a thing? Her eyes scanned the room, searching for the man who was apparently to be her new keeper. She found him near the hearth, separate from the crowd. He wasn't what she expected. He was a man carved from stillness and shadow, his presence a void of silence in the noisy room. His shoulders were broad, his black hair pulled back from a face that was harsh, beautiful, and utterly unreadable. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He just watched the flames, his expression distant, his power a palpable aura that kept everyone at a careful distance. That was Alpha Kalen. And he looked utterly, dangerously bored. Just then, Alara swept past Jane's hiding place, moving to rejoin her father. Her perfume, a cloying floral scent, washed over Jane, thick and suffocating. Jane held her breath, waiting for it to pass. But as the wave of perfume faded, something else remained. A second scent, hiding beneath the first. Faint, almost unnoticeable. A sickly, sweet odor, like wilting flowers and decay. Jane froze, her hand flying to her mouth as a memory slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. Her mother's final days. The darkened room, the scent that clung to the sheets, to her mother's skin, a smell the healers couldn't explain. It was the same smell, the exact same smell. The world tilted, the noise of the hall fading to a distant roar. It wasn't a sickness, it wasn't a curse, it was a scent that came from something or someone, and that someone was her cousin. What had her mother discovered? What had she known that made her a liability? The grief in her heart curdled, twisting into something cold, sharp, and terrifying. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a murder. Chapter 4. A Bond of Moonlight and Fury. The air in the great hall grew thick, heavy with anticipation. A line of hopeful she-wolves stood before the raised dais, a collection of the pack's finest daughters, each one preened and polished for this moment. Jane watched from the shadows, the horrifying truth about her mother's death a shard of ice in her gut. She tried to make herself smaller, to fade into the very stone of the walls, because she knew with a sickening certainty that this ceremony was somehow connected to the web of lies her cousin was spinning. Alara stood proudly among the chosen, her chin high, a smug, proprietary light in her eyes. She was so sure. They were all so sure. The Silver Moon Beta cleared his throat, a sound that cut through the murmurs. "Alpha Kalen," he announced, his voice booming with false warmth. "My pack offers its strongest alliance, sealed with a bond to my own daughter, Kala." A pretty she-wolf with fire-red hair stepped forward, offering a graceful, practiced bow. A perfect match. A political necessity. Everyone expected Kalen to step forward, to accept the alliance, to take his chosen Luna. Jane saw the triumphant smirk flicker across Alara's face, but Kalen didn't move. A strange stillness fell over him. Then, a sound. So low it was more of a feeling, a vibration that seemed to shake the very floorboards. Growl. It was a sound of primal protest, of a beast fighting its cage. His head, which had been bowed in thought, snapped up. The bored, distant look in his eyes was gone. In its place was a blazing, luminous gold. The light of the wolf. His gaze swept over the line of she-wolves, dismissing them, seeing through them. He looked past Kala, past Alara. His eyes locked onto the shadows in the back of the room. His eyes found Jane. The world stopped. The noise, the people, the flickering torchlight. It all dissolved into a meaningless blur. There was only the weight of his stare, a physical force that pinned her, stripped her bare. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. He started to walk. Each step was deliberate, silent, a predator closing in. He walked past the Beta's daughter. He walked right past Alara, whose face twisted into a mask of disbelief and rage. He didn't stop until he stood directly in front of Jane, blocking out the rest of the world. Up close, he was a mountain of raw power and unspoken sorrow. He smelled of pine and winter and a deep, aching loneliness that called to her own. He raised a hand, his fingers gently grazing her cheek. A jolt, hot and electric, shot through her. It wasn't a spark, it was lightning. The bond, a mythical thing she'd only ever heard of in whispers, slammed into her, fierce and undeniable. It felt like destiny. It felt like a cage. His voice was a low rumble, meant for her alone, yet it echoed through the silent hall. Mine. Chapter 5. No place for the weak chaos erupted. The single word from the visiting alpha shattered the diplomatic calm, sending waves of shock and fury through the hall. Jane didn't see it. She was swept away by two of Kalen's warriors, their grips firm but not unkind, and led through a side door into a small, cold antechamber. The heavy oak door shut behind them, muffling the uproar, leaving her in a sudden, ringing silence. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Mine. The word was a brand on her soul. What did it mean? Was this her father's plan all along? To have her claimed by a strange alpha in the most humiliating way possible? The door opened again, but it wasn't Kalen. It was a she-wolf, tall and lean, with a jagged scar that cut through one eyebrow and a presence that radiated lethal competence. Her dark eyes, sharp and intelligent, held no welcome. They held suspicion. This had to be his second-in-command, his beta. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't have to. She began to circle Jane, her movements fluid and predatory, her gaze missing nothing. Jane felt like a mouse being inspected by a hawk. "So," the she-wolf finally spoke, her voice a low, gravelly hum. "You're the one." Jane swallowed, her throat dry. I don't understand what's happening." "Don't you?" The beta stopped in front of her, crossing her arms over her chest. "Your pack is weak, riddled with ambition and soft living. Ours is not. Ours was forged from blood and loss. We have survived things your father can't even imagine." Her eyes narrowed. "We did that by cutting out our weaknesses, by trusting no one." She leaned in closer, her scent, leather and steel, a sharp contrast to Kalen's wildness. The implication was clear. Jane was a weakness. Jane was not to be trusted. "I am not a threat to your pack," Jane said, her own voice sounding thin and reedy to her ears. The beta let out a short, harsh laugh. "Aren't you? You appear from nowhere, a forgotten pup with a rogue's bloodline, and our alpha, an alpha who has shown no interest in a mate for 5 years, suddenly claims you. It smells like a political move, a plant, a trick." She took one last, long look at Jane, her gaze lingering with contempt. "Our pack needs a warrior, a leader, not some decorative Luna. Not some worthless tribute offered up to settle a score." Worthless. There it was again. The same word Alara had used. The word they had buried her mother with. Something inside Jane, a thing that had been sleeping or perhaps broken, finally snapped. The fear didn't vanish, but a cold, quiet anger rose to meet it. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin to meet the beta's hostile gaze. "I am not a tribute." Chapter 6. The Weight of a Title. Just as the defiant words left her lips, the antechamber door swung open with a resounding thud. Alpha Kalen filled the frame, his sheer size seeming to shrink the already small room. An immediate, oppressive silence fell. He brought with him the chill of the night and an authority so absolute it was a physical weight. His golden eyes, no longer hazed by the wolf's immediate instinct, were sharp and clear as they took in the scene. He looked at his beta, Lyra, whose hostile posture instantly softened into one of guarded respect. Then his gaze shifted to Jane. It was like being seen by a god, impersonal, ancient, and unnerving. He gave no sign that he had heard their conversation, yet Jane knew he had. She could feel it in the air, in the subtle tightening of the muscles around his jaw. He didn't need to hear the words. He could probably smell the hostility, the fear, the anger. Without a word, he gave Lyra a look. It was nothing more than a slight narrowing of his eyes, but it was enough. The message was clear. Leave. The beta dipped her head in a short, sharp nod and was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving Jane utterly alone with the alpha who had just claimed her. He didn't move closer. He just watched her, his expression a mask of stone. The wild, possessive energy she'd felt from him in the hall was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness that was somehow far more terrifying. She felt like a problem he was trying to solve. "The bond is a fact," he said finally, his voice a deep, quiet rumble that vibrated through her bones. It was the first time he had truly spoken to her. My wolf chose you. That cannot be undone. Jane waited, a knot of ice forming in her stomach. There was a but coming, a big one. But my pack comes before any bond, he continued, his eyes as cold as a winter night. They come before me. They come before you. They have bled, and they have suffered, and they will not be brought down by a weakness in their Luna. He took a single, slow step forward. My pack needs more than just a title. It needs strength. It needs a survivor. His gaze bored into her, stripping away every defense she had. Your family thinks you are worthless. My beta thinks you are a liability. He stopped, standing so close now she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You have 1 week, he stated, each word a chip of ice. 1 week to prove them wrong. And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving her in the deafening silence. The weight of his ultimatum crashed down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. She wasn't his mate. Not really. She was a test, a trial, a thing to be measured, and if she failed, a thing to be discarded. She had been claimed only to be threatened, taken from one cage only to be locked in another. The word echoed in the sudden emptiness of the room, a challenge and a death sentence all in one. Worthless. Chapter 7. A Camp of Scars and Stone. The journey to the Silver Moon territory was a silent one. Jane rode on a horse beside Kaylin, the chasm between them wider than the rugged trail they traveled. The lush, gentle forests of her home pack slowly gave way to something wilder, a landscape of jagged gray stone, ancient pines, and a wind that bit with an unforgiving chill. This land was not soft or forgiving. It was hard, and it was clear it bred hard wolves. It had to, because survival was a constant battle here. When they finally arrived, Jane understood why. It wasn't a village. It was a fortress. The camp was nestled in a narrow, defensible valley, surrounded by a formidable wall of sharpened logs and stone. The buildings within were practical, built from dark wood and river rock, with no thought given to comfort or beauty. Smoke curled from a communal fire pit in the center, where wolves of all ages worked, their movements economical and purposeful. They were mending nets, sharpening blades, salting meat, and they all bore scars. Old ones, new ones, on their arms, their faces, their souls. This was a pack that had been through a war. An elderly she-wolf with eyes as pale as the winter moon approached, offering Jane a small, chipped wooden cup of water. Her name was Alara, and her smile was the first genuine kindness Jane had seen in days. Our home was not always like this, the old wolf murmured, her voice raspy. We once lived by the great river in a valley of green, but the rogues, a great horde led by a monster, they burned it all. We lost everything. This is what we have built from the ashes. Jane's heart ached with a sudden, sharp empathy. They weren't just cold and suspicious. They were grieving. They were survivors. They were strong. They were united. They were unbreakable. That evening, as the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, Kaylin gathered the pack. He stood before the fire, its light dancing across the harsh planes of his face, making him look like some ancient wolf god. Jane stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling every wary eye on her. This is Jane of the Blackwood Pack. Kaylin's voice cut through the cold air, sharp and clear. He didn't call her his mate. He didn't call her Luna. She is a guest here. Like all things in this pack, her place must be earned. A low murmur rippled through the wolves. For weeks, a phantom stag has eluded our best hunters, Kaylin continued, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing, heavy and final, on Jane. It is clever and it is fast and it has made a mockery of our skills. At dawn she will track it, she will go alone, and she will prove her worth, or she will prove she has none. The challenge hung in the air, a public declaration of her trial. Later, in a small, empty tent furnished with nothing but a thin bedroll, the weight of his words settled over her. An impossible task, a test designed for failure. But as the fear swirled in her gut, a tiny defiant spark ignited. They thought she was worthless. It was time to show them what worthless could do. Chapter 8. Echoes in the Earth. The dawn air was so cold it felt like swallowing needles. Jane slipped out of her tent before the camp was fully awake, a small leather pack on her back containing only water and a knife. She could feel the weight of their judgment without even seeing it. They expected her to fail. Her own father expected her to fail. Maybe a small, treacherous part of her whispered, they were right. She pushed the thought away. She had one skill, one secret her mother had given her, and it was the only thing she had left to believe in. She walked for an hour, deep into the unfamiliar, dense forest, letting the sounds of the camp fade completely. The hunters from this pack would have searched for hoofprints, for broken twigs, for all the conventional signs of passage. But her mother had taught her that the real story of the forest wasn't written on the surface. It was whispered in the deep places. This was the only way, because traditional tracking would take days she simply didn't have. Finding a place where the roots of a great ironwood tree broke through the soil like the knuckles of a giant hand, Jane knelt. She closed her eyes, shutting out the world. The scent of damp earth and pine filled her senses. She placed her palms flat against the cold, gnarled wood, and she listened, not with her ears, with her skin, with her soul. At first, there was only noise, a chaotic symphony of life, the frantic skittering of a beetle under the bark, the slow, patient pull of a worm through the soil, the distant thud of a woodpecker. She breathed out, pushing the surface sounds away, reaching deeper. The earth breathes, Jane. Match your pulse to its pulse. She let her own heartbeat slow, sinking into the quiet. And then she felt it. Faint. So faint. But it was there. A slow, heavy, rhythmic vibration that traveled through the intricate network of roots. A deep, resonant thrum that was completely different from the lighter scurrying of smaller creatures. It was a heartbeat. A powerful, steady heartbeat that echoed through the ground itself. Thump, 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 thump. It was miles away, moving north toward the rocky hills, but it was as clear to her as a shout in a silent room. The phantom stag. A breath she hadn't realized she was holding escaped her lips in a shaky sigh. A slow, quiet smile touched her lips, the first real smile in what felt like a lifetime. She could do this. This was her language. This was her strength. She wasn't a hunter who moved through the forest. She was a part of it. For the first time, not since her mother died, she didn't feel like a worthless rogue's child. She felt like herself. She opened her eyes, the path forward now an invisible, vibrating map in her mind, and rose to her feet, moving with a newfound certain grace. Chapter 9. Blood on the Leaves. The earth did not lie. It led her on a winding path through thickets and across babbling streams to a place no hunter would ever think to look. A tiny, hidden glade encircled by a ring of ancient, weeping willows. And there it was, the phantom stag. Its coat was the color of silver mist, and its antlers branched out like a crown of polished bone. It was magnificent. It was real. Kaelin hadn't demanded its death, only proof. Jane approached slowly, her steps silent on the mossy ground. The stag watched her with intelligent, dark eyes but did not bolt. It was as if the forest had already told it she was a friend. She reached out and plucked a single silver-tipped leaf from a low-hanging willow branch, her proof, and gave the stag a quiet nod before turning back the way she came. A quiet sense of triumph warmed her, a feeling so foreign she barely recognized it. She had done it. She had passed the impossible test. The journey back to camp felt lighter, the path clearer. Then, the forest went dead silent. The birdsong stopped. The chirping of insects ceased. The wind held its breath. It was a sudden, unnatural emptiness that prickled the hairs on the back of her neck. A hunter's silence, the silence of an ambush. They exploded from the undergrowth, a blur of snarling fury and tattered leather. 3 of them. Rogues. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes burning with a desperate feral hunger. They were not here to talk. They were here to kill. Jane reacted on pure, screaming instinct. Dodge, duck, weave. She was not a warrior. She had no formal training. But she had spent her life being invisible, learning how to move without a sound. A rogue lunged, claws extended. She dropped, whispering a single, urgent word to the ground. A thick, thorny vine shot up from the soil, wrapping around the rogue's ankle and sending him crashing to the forest floor. Another came at her with a crude stone knife. She used her small size, darting under his clumsy swing, grabbing a fallen branch and slamming it against the back of his knee. He howled in pain. She fought with the forest as her partner. She used her speed. She used her mind. She was surviving. She was winning. The third one caught her off guard. As she focused on the other two, he came from the side, his claws raking across her left forearm. Pain, white-hot and blinding, seared through her. She cried out, stumbling back. Her vision swam. The scent of her own blood, sharp and coppery, filled the air, making the rogues even more frantic. With a final surge of adrenaline, she threw her knife, burying it in the third rogue's shoulder. He roared in agony, and that was enough. They saw she was not easy prey. They turned and fled back into the woods, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. Jane was left panting, her body screaming, leaning heavily against the rough bark of a pine. The quiet victory she had felt moments ago was gone, washed away by the metallic tang of blood and the chilling echo of their snarls. The world began to tilt, the edges of her vision turning dark and fuzzy. She clutched her bleeding arm, a single terrifying thought cutting through the pain. She had passed the test, but she might not survive long enough to prove it. Chapter 10. A different kind of strength. The world was a smear of green and brown, the edges of her vision fraying into darkness. Jane's knees buckled. The rough bark of the pine tree was the only thing holding her upright. It sent a sharp, clean anchor in a spinning sea of pain. The coppery tang of her own blood filled her throat. So this is it, she thought with a strange, distant calm. I passed the test, and I die alone in the woods. Then, a different scent cut through the haze, something that didn't belong to the forest. Pine, yes, but also a sharp, clean blast of winter air and a current of something intensely alive. Kalen. He was there a second later, moving through the trees not like a wolf, but like a shadow given form. His golden eyes took in the scene in an instant. The blood-soaked leaves, the faint tracks of the retreating rogues, the gash on her arm. His face was a mask of unreadable granite, but a flicker of something raw and furious burned in the depths of his gaze. He didn't say a word. He simply scooped her into his arms as if she weighed less than nothing and started moving back toward the camp with a ground-eating stride that was impossibly fast and smooth. The journey was a dizzying blur. Jane was aware of the solid, steady beat of his heart against her ear, the secure strength of his arms, the way he held her with a fierce possessiveness that had nothing to do with gentleness and everything to do with ownership. He didn't take her to the pack's main healer. Instead, he carried her straight to his own tent, a larger, more isolated dwelling set apart from the others. He laid her carefully on a thick bed of furs, the warmth a shocking comfort against her chilled skin. With a methodical, practiced efficiency that spoke of 1,000 battles, he tended to her wound. He washed away the blood with warm water and herbs that stung, his touch firm and impersonal, yet surprisingly careful. He stitched the gash closed with a steady hand, his focus absolute. He wasn't her mate, comforting her. He was a warrior, patching up a soldier. And yet, there was no pity in his touch, and for that, she was grateful. He treated her not as a victim, but as a fighter. He finished wrapping the wound in clean linen, his gaze lingering on the smaller cuts and bruises. 3 of them, he stated, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. You fought them off. Jane nodded, her throat tight. He looked from her arm to her eyes. Your tracks are strange. There is no sign of a desperate struggle. You moved with the terrain. You used the forest. It was strategy, not panic. He paused, his gaze intense, searching. My best warriors are trained to fight with fang and claw. You fight like something else entirely. Where did you learn to move like that? The question hung in the air, a genuine inquiry, not an accusation. He wasn't just looking at her wound, he was looking at her. And in that moment, she made a choice. My mother taught me, she whispered, her voice hoarse. She said the forest has a language if you're quiet enough to listen, that it's a partner, not just a place. The secret spilled out, a torrent of truth after a lifetime of silence. I didn't track the stag with my eyes, Kaylin. I tracked it with my hands. I felt its heartbeat through the earth. Chapter 11. The earth between us. Kaylin's stillness was absolute. Jane expected disbelief, perhaps scorn, or even an accusation of dark magic. She was prepared for him to call her a liar, to declare her a witch and end her trial right there. Instead, his stern expression softened, not with warmth, but with a profound, consuming curiosity that was far more startling. The Alpha, who was a fortress of stone and ice, looked at her and saw something he recognized. He looked at her and saw a power he thought was dead. For a long moment, the only sounds were the crackle of the small fire and the wind sighing against the thick hide of the tent. Show me, he said. The two words were not a command. They were a raw, quiet plea. Sometime later, after she had rested, he led her away from the camp, deep into a part of the forest where ancient moss-covered monoliths stood like sleeping giants. The air here was different, humming with an old, quiet power. He wasn't testing her now. She knew this. He was a seeker, searching for a truth he'd only ever heard in legends. Because he asked instead of ordering, she felt a flicker of trust, fragile but real. Hesitantly, Jane knelt on the damp, loamy earth. She closed her eyes and reached out, not with the desperation of her test, but with a calm focus. She let the pulse of the forest fill her senses. Kaylin stood nearby, watching in utter silence. To show him, she focused on something small, a patch of ferns, their fronds curled tight in the chill. She sent a gentle, silent request through the soil, a nudge of encouragement. Slowly, gracefully, one of the fronds began to uncurl, stretching toward the faint moonlight that filtered through the canopy. She opened her eyes and looked at him. The awe on his face was a revelation. It stripped away the hardened Alpha, leaving behind the wolf who had lost his home, the leader who was seeking any advantage to protect his people. Our oldest lore speaks of this, he murmured, his voice thick with wonder. The Earth Singers. We thought the bloodline was broken, that the skill had faded from the world forever. Then, he did something that shattered her every expectation. He moved to her side and knelt, the action both humbling and powerful. He was an Alpha, kneeling to her. He placed his large, calloused hand over hers where it rested on the ground. A jolt, pure and white-hot, shot up her arm. It was the mate bond. Yes, but it was amplified, supercharged by the raw energy of the earth beneath them. Their connection, his and hers, was a conduit for the forest's own pulse. He looked into her eyes, his own golden gaze stripped of all its coldness, leaving only a raw, burning intensity. Teach me. In that moment, under the silent watch of the ancient stones, their relationship was reforged. This was not about a faded bond or a political claim. This was a choice. As she guided his hand, helping him feel for the faintest echo of the rhythm she felt so strongly, a true partnership was born. A union not of titles but of shared secret power. Chapter 12, A Poisoned Legacy. In the weeks that followed, a quiet routine bloomed in secret between them. Their training sessions in the deep woods became a sanctuary, a place where he was not just an alpha and she was not just a trial. He was a patient, focused student. She was a natural, intuitive teacher. With his hand over hers, he began to feel the faintest whispers of the Earth's language. With every shared lesson, the walls between them crumbled, replaced by a deep, unspoken respect. For the first time in her life, Jane felt safe. She felt seen. This newfound security gave her the courage to face the ghosts she had been avoiding. One evening, curled by the fire in Kaylin's tent, she pulled out her mother's journal. She wasn't just mourning now. She was a detective searching for a killer. With a clear head and a steady heart, she revisited the coded entries, looking for any mention of a sickly sweet scent, for any hint of who her mother might have feared. She found it tucked away at the very end, written on a page so thin it was almost translucent. The script was frantic, barely legible, a stark contrast to her mother's usual elegant hand. It was a final, desperate warning. "They have a pact," the entry began, the code rushed but unmistakable. "Marcus and Alara. I found the ledgers. They're funding him, arming him. The rogue of the Burning Valley." Jane's blood ran cold. The rogue of the Burning Valley. That was the name Kaylin's elder had given the monster who had destroyed their ancestral home. The architect of all their suffering. Her father. Her cousin. Allied with him? It didn't make sense. Why? Why would they help an enemy who threatened them all? The next lines answered the horrifying question. A bid for power. They help him weaken the other packs, and in the chaos my husband plans to declare himself High Alpha. A king. Her mother had discovered a treason of the highest order, a conspiracy that had cost hundreds of lives, all for her father's ambition. The final sentence was the one that stopped her heart. He brings them a gift, a rare poison from the southern swamps. Alara calls it the widow's kiss. It smells of rotting moon petals. I am a liability. I fear they know I know. The journal slipped from her numb fingers. The sickly, sweet scent. The lingering illness the healers couldn't cure. The slow, agonizing withering. It all slammed into place. Her mother hadn't just been a victim of a family's ambition. She had been assassinated. A political execution, carried out by her own daughter using a poison supplied by the very same Alpha who had made Kaylin's pack refugees. A wave of icy fury washed over her, so potent it left her breathless. This was not separate. Her pain and Kaylin's pain were not two different stories. They were one. They were born from the same betrayal, the same serpent's alliance. Their enemies were not just shadows from their pasts. They were a united front. And they were still out there. She snatched the journal from the floor and ran from the tent, her only thought a burning, desperate need. She had to find him. She had to tell him everything. Now. Chapter 13. A map made of heartbeats. The air in Kaylin's war tent crackled with a tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Jane stood before the Alpha and his inner circle, her mother's journal held tight in her hands. The words spilled from her, a frantic, horrifying torrent of truth about her father's treason, Alara's poison, and the unholy alliance that had cost Kaylin his home. She explained the ledgers, the plot for a blood-soaked crown, the deliberate, cold-blooded murder of her own mother. As she spoke, she watched Kaylin's face. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply listened, his expression hardening from stone into something far more dangerous. Steel. When she finished, the tent was utterly silent. Lyra and the other warriors stared, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning fury. The pieces of their past, the unexplained betrayals, the sheer ferocity of the attack that had destroyed their home, it all finally had a source. It wasn't a random horde, it was a conspiracy. Kaylin slowly closed his eyes. For a moment, Jane saw not an alpha, but a male haunted by ghosts. This new information didn't just give him an enemy, it gave his pain a name, it gave his vengeance a direction. Because he now understood the depth of the betrayal, he was able to channel years of grief into a single, focused point of cold, lethal rage. He opened his eyes, the gold within them burning with a chilling, absolute certainty. He looked at Jane, and for the first time, there was no test in his gaze, no evaluation. There was only a shared purpose, a bond forged not just by fate, but by a common enemy. "You said you could feel the stag," he said, his voice a low, deadly calm. "This war camp, this nest of serpents, can you feel them?" All eyes turned to her. The weight of their hope, their trust, was a heavy cloak on her shoulders. She nodded, her own fear eclipsed by a wave of cold determination. "I can try." She knelt, placing her hands not on the ground, but on the massive, carved wooden map of the territories that lay on the central table. She closed her eyes, pushing past the life of the forest, past the steady pulse of the earth. She searched for something else. A sickness. A chaotic, festering energy of too many hateful hearts beating in one place. It was a discordant noise against the planet's steady rhythm. She found it. A dark, throbbing stain on the Earth's clean energy, 2 days' ride to the east, hidden in a network of jagged, impassable canyons. "There," she whispered, her finger tracing a line on the map. "Hidden in the Shadow Creek canyons. Hundreds of them. They're planning something big." Kalen's hand slammed down on the table, a sound like cracking stone. The ghosts in his eyes were gone, replaced by the promise of a reckoning. He looked at his warriors, at Lyra, at Jane. "For 5 years we have been healing," he declared, his voice ringing with the authority of a king. "We have been surviving. That is over." His gaze was a physical force, igniting the fire in every warrior present. He was their leader. He was their hope. He was their fury. "We are done waiting for the wolves at our door. We will become the wolves in theirs. We strike at dusk tomorrow." Chapter 14. Whispers and Blades. Twilight bled across the sky, painting the undersides of the clouds in shades of lavender and blood. The Silver Moon warriors moved through the darkening forest with a silence that was unnatural, their paws making no sound on the damp earth. Jane was at the center of the formation, flanked by Kalen and Lyra, her senses extended, her mind a living map of the terrain ahead. She was not here to fight with claws, but with the very forest itself. This was her true purpose, and she embraced it because it was the only way to protect the people who were finally starting to feel like her own. As they neared the canyons, she put her hands to the ground, feeling the web of life around them. "2 guards on the eastern ridge," she murmured, her voice a soft whisper that only Kalen and Lyra could hear. "They're watching the main approach. We go through the creek bed. It's blind to them." Kalen gave a sharp, silent hand signal, and the war party shifted its course without a sound. They moved like water, flowing around the enemy's defenses. This was a new kind of warfare, one of impossible stealth, guided by a magic no one had seen in generations. Jane could feel the grudging respect from the warriors around her. It was a quiet, potent thing. Once they were in position on the ridge overlooking the chaotic, sprawling camp, Kalen gave her a nod. "Now." Jane took a deep breath and plunged her focus into the valley below. She didn't summon a storm or an earthquake. She used whispers. She nudged a current of air, sending their scent spiraling away to the west, away from the camp's sentries. Then she sent a phantom sound, the sharp, unmistakable crack of a heavy branch, echoing through the woods on the far side of the camp. Several guards grunted and moved to investigate, abandoning their posts. The path was clear. "Go," she breathed. Kalen and his elite warriors descended like ghosts, their targets not the rogues themselves, but their future. The supply tents, the armory, the food stores. While they moved with lethal precision, Jane played her own part. She reached out to the earth within the camp itself, coaxing thick, gnarled roots to snake across the main pathways, creating unseen tripwires. She gathered the moisture from the air, weaving a sudden, dense fog that billowed up from the creek, sowing confusion and shrouding their retreat. Flames suddenly erupted in the heart of the camp, a brilliant orange flower of destruction. Shouts of panic and rage echoed up the canyon walls. It was the signal. The strike was complete. Kalen's warriors were already pulling back, melting into the fog and the shadows they had used for cover. The attack had been a spectacular success. They had crippled the enemy's ability to march, and they had done it with minimal bloodshed, a victory of strategy over brute force. As they regrouped in the deep woods, miles away, Lyra stopped beside Jane. The scarred beta's face was unreadable in the moonlight, but her eyes held a new light. "The Earth Singer," Lyra said, the words a quiet admission. "The legends are true." It was the closest thing to an apology and a vow of loyalty Jane could imagine. Chapter 15. A Serpent's Hiss. They returned to the Silver Moon camp, not with the boisterous cheers of victory, but with the grim, quiet satisfaction of a wound finally avenged. A crucial blow had been struck. Hope, a commodity that had been scarce for 5 long years, began to flicker in the eyes of the pack. As Kalen recounted their success, describing how Jane's unique skill had made them invisible, Jane felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was the feeling of belonging, the feeling of being worthy. She was not a tribute or a burden or a political pawn. She was a weapon. She was theirs. The moment of peace was shattered when a sentry called out from the wall. A single rider was approaching, flying the black and gray colors of the Blackwood pack under a banner of truce. A cold dread immediately extinguished Jane's warmth. A truce? After they had just aided in crippling their secret ally? It made no sense. Kalen and Jane met the rider at the gate. It was a young wolf named Piers, his face pale with fear, his eyes darting around as if he expected to be torn apart at any moment. "A message," he stammered, holding out a sealed scroll. "From Lady Alara. She insisted it be delivered to Jane. Directly." Kalen took the scroll, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. He broke the wax seal and unrolled the fine parchment. Jane stood beside him, her heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm of dread against her ribs. She recognized Alara's perfect, elegant handwriting immediately. The message was short. Kalen read it aloud, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Dearest cousin, I hear you lit a brave little fire in the canyons. How clever of you. I suppose even a stray must find a way to be useful to its new master. But you should know, while you are off playing warrior queen, I have been minding things at home. I have a tribute of my own to offer, a secret weapon, you might say. He has your mother's eyes, did you know that? It would be a shame if his blood was the price for your little victory. E." The world dissolved into a silent, roaring vortex. The words didn't make sense, and yet they made a horrible, perfect kind of sense. Jane's mind raced, scrambling through fragments of memory, through whispers she had dismissed as a child. A hidden room, a hushed conversation between her parents. Her father's fury. A brother. She had a brother. A younger brother, hidden away his entire life. A secret kept from the pack. Likely because his existence as a male heir complicated her father's political ambitions. A brother she had never met. A piece of her mother she never knew she had. And Alara had him. The victory, the sense of belonging, the hope, it all turned to ash and smoke in her mouth. This wasn't a counterattack, it was a checkmate. Alara wasn't just threatening a war. She was holding a knife to the throat of a ghost who shared Jane's own blood. Horror Chapter 16. A Debt of Blood. The revelation of a hidden brother, a hostage, sent a tremor of shock and horror through the Silver Moon pack. But there was no time to plan. No time to grieve this new, cruel twist of the knife. A single, mournful blast from the watchman's horn sliced through the tense air. It was followed by another and another, a frantic, desperate rhythm. They were under attack. Not by a scouting party, by an army. Rogues poured from the tree line, a wave of mangy fur and rabid fury, moving with a speed and coordination that should have been impossible. Chaos erupted. The battle was a maelstrom of sound and fury. The clash of claw on claw, the snarls of fighting wolves, the screams of the wounded. Jane was hurried toward the back lines, but she could see it all. The attack was too perfect. The rogues knew every weak point in the wall, every blind spot in the watchtowers. They had a map of this camp's very heart, and they were cutting it to pieces. Because she understood they had been betrayed from within, a cold, sickening dread washed over her. In the swirling heart of the battle, Kaelin fought like a demigod of destruction, a blur of black fur and righteous rage. Lyra was at his side, her movements a deadly dance, the two of them a seamless unit of defense. But they were being overwhelmed. A massive rogue, larger than the others, with cruel, intelligent eyes, broke through the defensive line. He moved with a purpose, ignoring all others, his target clear. Kaelin. No! Lyra's scream was raw, full of a sudden, soul-deep anguish. She shoved Kaelin back, putting herself between him and the charging rogue leader. "Kaelin, I'm so sorry!" she cried out over the roar of the fight, her confession a torrent of desperate, ragged words. "The rogue Alpha, his name is Phelan. He's Gavryl's brother, your old beta. They planted me here. They killed my mate and swore they'd give me revenge on the Alphas who set us up. I believed them." Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the blood and grime. "But this pack, you are my true family now." The confession hit Kaelin with the force of a physical blow, a betrayal so deep it was unthinkable. Phelan, his dead friend's brother, the monster who had orchestrated his pack's destruction. And Lyra, the warrior he had trusted implicitly, had been a spy. Before he could even process the words, Phelan lunged. Time seemed to slow. Lyra didn't hesitate. She threw herself directly into the path of the attack, her body a shield for her Alpha. Phelan's claws, long and sharp as daggers, tore through her, a gasp, a spray of crimson on the dirt. She collapsed at Kaelin's feet. Her dying eyes found his, full of a terrible, clear-eyed peace. "This is my penance," she choked, a bloody froth on her lips. "My loyalty is to you, to Silvermoon." Her last breath was a sigh, her debt paid in blood. Her sacrifice was an act of ultimate devotion. It was a final, desperate apology. It was the cost of her redemption. Chapter 17. A necessary sacrifice. Lyra's death broke something in Kaelin. The cold, controlled fury he always wielded erupted into a volcano of pure, untamed rage. He became the beast of their legends, a whirlwind of destruction. But it wasn't enough. The rogues were too many. The betrayal had cut too deep. The battle was turning into a slaughter. Then, from the ridge overlooking the valley, two figures appeared, silhouetted against the burning camp. Alara, her blonde hair like a pale flame in the firelight, and beside her Jane's father, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. The fighting faltered as Alara raised a hand, and in her other arm she held a small, struggling child, a little boy with wide, terrified eyes, her brother, Jane's brother. "Alpha Kaelin!" Alara's voice, magically amplified, carried across the battlefield. "A generous offer, my dear cousin, in exchange for the boy, and we will grant you the mercy of our withdrawal. Refuse," she added, her voice dropping to a silken threat, "and we will kill the child and grind your precious pack into dust." The choice was impossible, a strategic nightmare. Give up the one thing that held their future together, the Alpha's mate for a life they couldn't be sure was even real. The warriors looked to Kaelin, but he was frozen, his face a canvas of agony. He was trapped between the ghost of Lyra's betrayal and the fresh horror of this decision. Jane looked at his tortured face, at the terrified child, at the pack that had become her own being decimated. And she knew. She could not let them all die for a war her family had started. This was her blood, her poison, her responsibility. Because it was the only move left on the board, she had to make the sacrifice herself. She reached out, not with her hands, but with her mind, pushing every ounce of her will, her love, her desperate hope through the mate bond. It was a silent, frantic plea. Kaylin. Trust me. Do not follow. Let me go. I have a plan. She didn't know if it was a lie or a prayer, but she needed him to believe it. Then, she stepped out from behind the defensive line, her head held high, her back straight. The chaos of the battle seemed to fade, focusing on this one quiet moment. I'll go, she called out, her voice clear and ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She began to walk across the blood-soaked ground toward the enemy line. With every step, she could feel Kaylin's agony through the bond. It was a physical tearing, a shredding of his very soul. He was losing everything all over again. As her father's guards grabbed her arms, their touch rough and familiar, the vibrant, humming connection between her and Kaylin stretched thin. Thinner. And then went terrifyingly, completely silent. An empty void where a universe of feeling had just been. Chapter 18. In the Serpent's Grasp. The world had become a cage. Jane was thrown into a stone cell in the dungeons beneath her old home, the air thick with the smell of mildew and forgotten misery. The irony was a bitter pill, to be a prisoner in the very place that was supposed to be her birthright. The heavy iron door slammed shut, the sound echoing the closing of a tomb. She was home. She was captured. She was utterly, completely alone. Sometime later, the door creaked open, spilling torchlight into the gloom. Alara entered, a triumphant, cruel smile playing on her lips. Beside her stood the rogue alpha, Phelan. In person, he was handsome, charismatic, his eyes holding a predatory intelligence that was far more terrifying than any mindless brute. They looked like a king and queen visiting the lowest of their subjects. Well, cousin, Alara purred, circling the cell. Look at you, right back where you belong, in the dirt. Phelan chuckled, a low, pleasant sound that made Jane's skin crawl. Don't be so modest, my dear Alara. She served her purpose beautifully. Kaylin is broken. His pack is shattered. They are ripe for the harvest. They began to talk, not to her but over her, as if she were a piece of furniture. They laid out their grand design with sadistic glee. They had no intention of releasing her brother. He was a tool, nothing more. Tomorrow, they would drag Jane before what was left of the Blackwood pack. They would force her to publicly renounce her claim, to name her father the sole, uncontested ruler, and to legitimize their alliance with Phelan's horde. After she had played her part, after she had signed away her own legacy, they would kill her, and her brother. Then, they would march their combined forces back to the Silver Moon camp and wipe every last man, woman, and child from the face of the earth. To prove her point, Alara produced a small corked vial from her belt. It was filled with a swirling black liquid. Do you know what this is? She asked, her voice a soft, venomous whisper. She uncorked it. The smell hit Jane like a physical blow. Sickly sweet. The scent of dying flowers, rotting moon petals. The widow's kiss, Alara said, savoring the name. A gift from Phelan's people. It's what quieted your mother when she became too inquisitive. It's slow. It feels like your own body is betraying you piece by piece. She held the vial close to Jane's face. After you've made your little speech tomorrow, you'll get to experience our family's generosity for yourself. The chains on her wrists were laced with silver, sapping her strength, cutting off her connection to the earth. The bond with Kaylin was a dead, aching void inside her. Her only family wanted to murder her. Her new family thought she had abandoned them, and the one person she loved was lost in a grief she had caused. Hope was not just lost. It was a fool's dream. There was no plan. There was no escape. There was only the smell of poison and the suffocating final weight of being worthless after all. Chapter 19. An Echo of a Heartbeat. The silence was the enemy. Kaylin sat in the semi-darkness of his tent, the silence of the severed bond a screaming void in his soul. It was worse than any physical wound. It was an amputation of a part of himself he hadn't known existed until it was gone. His pack was shattered, his beta was dead, and his mate, his Jane, was gone. He had let her walk away. He had stood there, frozen by a ghost of a past betrayal, and he had let his future be led away in chains. The despair was a physical weight, a crushing stone on his chest that made every breath an agony. All was lost because he had allowed his own pain to blind him to her strength. He stared at the dirt floor, his hands clenched into fists. He was a fool, a broken alpha leading a broken pack to its grave. Trust me. The words were not a sound, but an echo in the empty space where their bond had been. Her final, desperate message. He had thought it was a lie, a gentle thing said to ease his pain as she walked to her death. But now, in the crushing silence, he replayed the last few weeks. He remembered the look on her face when she'd shown him her power, a mixture of fear and fierce pride. He remembered the feel of her hand under his, the patient way she guided him to feel the pulse of the world. She fought with strategy, not brute force. She was a survivor. She did not break. She was not a victim being led to slaughter. She was a queen sacrificing her most powerful piece in a desperate gambit to save the board. Driven by an instinct he didn't understand, Kaelin knelt. He pressed his palm flat against the cold, packed earth of the floor, mimicking the pose he'd seen her take a dozen times. He closed his eyes, searching for that deep, quiet rhythm she had promised him was there. He felt nothing, only cold dirt and his own hollow grief. He pushed past his own failure. He focused on the void inside him, on the memory of her. He reached for her, and there it was, a spark, impossibly faint, a tiny, rhythmic pulse of warmth against the absolute zero of the void. It wasn't the earth, it was her. Her stubborn, defiant, unbreakable will to live, echoing across the distance, a single candle refusing to be extinguished in a hurricane. She wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was waiting. She was fighting. And she was trusting him. He gasped, a ragged breath of air filling his lungs for what felt like the first time since she'd left. Love wasn't a weakness that had lost him his family. It wasn't a poison that had taken his pack. It was a beacon. It was his greatest strength. He rose to his feet, the grief in his heart not gone, but forged into a new and terrible weapon. Purpose. He strode from the tent and gathered what was left of his pack. He stood before them, his eyes blazing with a light they thought had been extinguished forever. "I will not make a political choice for a Luna," he said, his voice ringing with cold, hard conviction. "I will not choose someone to die for us." His gaze met the eyes of every warrior. "I will choose a Luna who will lead us. I will choose Jane because she is our strength, because she is our leader. And we are going to bring our Luna home." Chapter 20. A War of Whispers. The Silver Moon War Council gathered again, but the atmosphere of despair had vanished. In its place was a desperate, razor-sharp focus, a feeling Kaelin had not felt among his people since before the fall of their old home. Hope was a dangerous thing, but it was also a powerful one. They had been given a reason to fight not just for survival, but for a future. They were ready to fight for their Luna because she had already proven she was willing to die for them. "The Blackwood pack outnumbers us 3-1, even without Phelan's horde," one of his captains said, his voice grim. "Their defenses are strong. A direct assault is suicide." "Then we will not fight a direct assault," Kaelin stated, his voice calm and certain. All eyes turned to him. "We have been fighting like wolves, with strength and fury and force. It is how we lost. Now, we will fight like the forest." He told them everything. He spoke of the Earth Singers, the ancient, forgotten magic that flowed through Jane's blood. He described how she had made them ghosts in their raid on Phelan's camp, how she could hear the whispers of the earth and command the wind. He was not just sharing a secret. He was sharing a new faith. He was telling them that their greatest weapon was not in their own claws, but in the hands of the woman they had to rescue. A stunned silence fell over the council. It was a legend, a children's story. but they had all seen the result of her story. They had all witnessed the impossible success of their raid. Our plan, Kaelin continued, leaning over the map, is not a battle. It is an infiltration, a rescue. We will move as a small team, at dawn, during the ceremony they have planned. We will use the chaos of the event as our cover. He pointed to the map, to the Blackwood settlement. Their entire strategy is to humiliate her, to break her in front of her old pack. They think she is powerless. They are wrong. He looked at his most trusted warriors. Our entire plan, our survival, hinges on one single gamble. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. We are betting that Jane is not a prisoner. We are betting that she is our agent behind enemy lines. We are betting that when we strike, she will be ready to strike with us. It was an insane risk, a plan built on a desperate hope and a faith in a power none of them truly understood. But as Kaelin looked at the faces of his warriors, he saw no doubt. They had seen her strength. They had felt her quiet resolve. They were no longer just his pack. In their hearts, they were already hers. He was ready to risk it all, because she had already risked everything for them. Chapter 21, Into the Blackwood Night fell like a black shroud over the wounded land. Kaelin and a hand-picked team of 5 moved out from the camp, leaving the rest to hold the fortress. They were shadows, slipping into the woods without a sound, their hearts beating with a grim, unified purpose. He had chosen his best, 2 of his swiftest scouts, his largest warrior for brute strength, a seasoned strategist, and the elder she-wolf, Alara, whose knowledge of herbs and poisons might prove useful, and whose quiet faith in Jane from the beginning had earned her a place of honor. They traveled through the harsh, unfamiliar wilderness that separated their territories. The land itself felt different here, somehow tainted. The natural hum of the earth that Jane had taught him to feel was muted, suppressed under the heavy weight of his old pack's tyrannical rule. The silence of the bond was still a constant, aching presence at his side, a phantom limb that he could no longer feel. But now, it wasn't a void of despair. It was a space filled with a silent, urgent promise. I am coming. He tried to use the skill she had shared with him. He was clumsy, a child learning to walk where she could run. But it was enough. By pressing his hand to the ancient trees, he could feel the faint, jarring vibrations of enemy patrols, allowing him to guide his team around them with an almost supernatural ease. He was using her gift to come for her, and the thought gave him a strength that pushed back the exhaustion. After hours of tense, silent travel, they finally reached the ridge overlooking the Blackwood settlement. The place he had once visited as an ally was now a hostile camp bristling with guards. The air smelled of too many wolves, of fear and stale smoke. And in the very center of the town square, stark and horrifying under the cold moonlight, was a newly built wooden platform. An executioner's stage. Preparations were already underway for the morning's grotesque ceremony. They were going to make a spectacle of her pain. A cold, clean rage settled in Kaelin's chest. It burned away all fear, all doubt, leaving only a perfect, diamond-hard resolve. He would tear this place apart, stone by stone, to get to her. He would burn her father's legacy to the ground and salt the earth where it stood. This was not just a rescue anymore. It was a reckoning. He looked at his 5 warriors. Their faces were grim, their expressions set. They saw the platform. They understood the stakes. There was no fear in their eyes, only the same cold fire that burned in his own heart. He gave the silent command to take positions, to rest and wait for the first light of dawn. The air was still. The world held its breath. The final battle was about to begin. Chapter 22. The reckoning dawn broke, cold and gray. Jane was hauled from her cell, the silver-laced chains on her wrists a constant, draining poison. They dragged her to the center of the town and forced her onto the wooden platform. Before her, the Blackwood pack was assembled, their faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and morbid curiosity. Alara stood at the center of the stage, radiant and cruel. while Jane's father looked on, his expression one of cold triumph. This was his coronation, and she was the final sacrifice. Hope was a dead thing in her chest. The bond was silent. The earth was a distant, unreachable memory. She was alone. "This rogue's child," Elara began, her voice ringing with false piety, "has brought a foreign alpha to our doorstep. She has betrayed her blood." As Elara gloated, Jane's gaze fell to the boards beneath her feet. Through a tiny crack, a single stubborn weed was pushing its way toward the light. It was small. It was insignificant. It was alive. "The strength isn't in the howl," her mother's voice whispered in her memory. "It's in the roots." With nothing left to lose, Jane focused every last shred of her will on that tiny spark of life. She reached for it, pleaded with it. A flicker. Faint, but there. A connection.
From the rooftop opposite the square, Kalen watched the scene unfold. A cold, silent promise of violence coiling in his gut. He saw Jane, chained and pale, but her head was held high. He saw the smug victory on Elara's face. He saw the weed. He saw Jane's eyes fix on it. He didn't know what she was doing, but he knew it was a signal. It was time. He gave the silent command to his warriors. Now, chaos erupted. Kalen's warriors descended upon the square like avenging angels, their attacks precise and devastating. They didn't target the crowd. They targeted the leaders. In that first moment of shock, Jane acted. She poured the tiny spark of power she'd found into the chains. They weren't solid silver, just plated. The metal groaned, twisted, and then shattered, the links falling away. Elara spun around, her face a mask of shocked fury, and lunged for Jane. But Jane didn't meet her with force. She met her with fear. She whispered to the wind, and the sickly sweet scent of the widow's kiss suddenly billowed around Elara. Her cousin screamed, thinking she'd been poisoned. Jane stomped her foot, and a thicket of thorny vines exploded from the wooden platform, wrapping around Elara's legs, holding her fast. At the same time, Kalen hit the platform, a black-furred meteor of rage. He finally stood face to face with Phelan, the serpent who had poisoned his life. Their battle was not a fight. It was a reckoning. It was the clash of a true alpha, fueled by love and a righteous fury, against a usurper driven by ambition. It was short. It was brutal. And it ended with Kalen standing over the body of his oldest enemy, his roar of victory a raw, soul-deep cry of liberation. The fighting stopped. Phelan was dead. Elara was captured. Jane's father was on his knees, his face ashen with defeat. Across the blood-stained platform, through the smoke and the silence, Kalen's eyes found Jane's. The void between them vanished, and the bond slammed back into place, a roaring, triumphant inferno of life and love and homecoming.
Chapter 23. Aftermath. In the quiet that followed the storm, Jane stood on the platform, Kalen's hand a warm, solid anchor in hers. She looked out at the faces of the Blackwood pack, the wolves she had grown up with, feared and hidden from. They stared back, their expressions stripped of all artifice. They were not just defeated, they were lost. They had witnessed the depth of their alpha's treason, the cruelty of their future Luna, and the impossible, earth-shattering power of the worthless girl they had scorned for a lifetime. Her father was dragged before them, his arrogance finally broken, leaving only a hollow, pathetic shell. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. He had gambled his pack, his family, and his honor, and he had lost everything. The pack wolves looked from his defeated form to Jane, standing beside the terrifying, victorious Silver Moon Alpha. They saw not a monster, but a partner. They saw a matched set. An old warrior, one who had served her grandfather, slowly pushed his way to the front of the crowd. He stopped at the base of the platform, his body stooped with age and sorrow, and he bowed his head. It was a gesture of profound, heartbreaking respect. "Your mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She had that same quiet strength, the true strength of the Blackwood line. We were blind. He lifted his gaze to meet hers, his eyes filled with a weary, desperate plea. He is not our alpha, not anymore. He gestured to her father. We would follow you, Jane, if you would lead us. The offer hung in the air, a future she had never, in her wildest dreams, considered. Power, the very thing her father had killed for, now laid at her feet. She looked at the sea of faces, at the home that had only ever brought her pain, at the people who had stood by and watched her humiliation. She felt no anger, no desire for revenge, only a deep, aching sadness for the family they could have been, for the home this place might have been. Because they were finally seeing her worth, the victory felt strangely hollow. Kaylin squeezed her hand, a silent, steady pressure. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The message was clear. It's your choice. Whatever you decide, I am with you. He wasn't claiming her territory. He was supporting his queen. And she knew with a sudden, peaceful certainty that she had a decision to make not just for them, but for herself. Chapter 24, Where the Roots Grow. Days later, the world felt new. The Silver Moon camp was bustling with a different kind of energy, filled with the refugees of the Blackwood Pack who had chosen to follow Jane. There was a sense of purpose, of rebuilding, a sense of hope. Jane stood with Kaylin on the ridge overlooking the valley, the cool evening breeze, a gentle, cleansing touch. The land below was not just his home anymore, it was theirs. They would still follow you, Kaylin said quietly, his voice a low rumble beside her. You could return, take your father's seat, rebuild your pack. You are their alpha by blood and by right. He turned to her, his golden eyes soft in the fading light. Whatever you choose, I will stand with you. Jane looked at his face, at the man who had seen her at her lowest, and had chosen to believe in her strength. She thought of her father's ambition, of Alara's poison, of a home built on secrets and cruelty. Then she thought of Lyra's sacrifice, of the elders' kindness, of the warriors who had gambled their lives on her power. My father taught me that blood is a weapon, she said softly, turning to face him. My cousin taught me that it's a cage. They were both wrong. She reached up, her hand gently tracing the line of his jaw. They taught me that blood doesn't make a family. Loyalty does. Respect does. Love. Her voice caught for a moment. Love does. My home isn't a place on a map, Kaylin. It's here, with you, with the pack that gave me a chance. She chose him. She chose them. She chose herself. His smile was a slow, breathtaking sunrise. He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that held no desperation or frantic need, only a deep, profound sense of peace, a promise of 1,000 sunrises to come. Months later, that promise had bloomed into a life she never could have imagined. She and Kaylin led the pack together, not as Alpha and Luna, but as true equal partners. Her quiet wisdom and connection to the land tempered his fierce strength, and together, they created a sanctuary of unparalleled strength and peace. One afternoon, a young wolf pup came bounding up to her, its tail wagging furiously. It dropped a small, muddy object at her feet. Jane knelt and picked it up. She wiped away the dirt, and her breath caught. It was the locket, small, silver, and somehow untarnished. She cleaned it carefully, the familiar weight a gentle memory in her palm. Kaylin came to stand beside her, watching as she polished the small silver heart until it shone. She didn't put it on. Instead, she knelt before the curious pup. A reminder, she whispered, fastening the chain gently around the little wolf's neck. That true strength isn't in the howl, or the bite, or the crown. The pup looked down at the shining locket, a symbol no longer of a painful past, but of a shared, hopeful future. It's in the roots you choose to grow.